What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So I've got something different planned for today. Not your typical unboxing or review, but rather instead I'm going to be testing out a product that I already own, which is my GTX 970. It's an EVGA for the Win Edition, so it's factory overclocked. It's running at stock right now. I didn't push it any further for the purpose of this video. But what I'm going to be doing with it today is I'm going to be running GTA 4 at 4K. And I'm going to see how much we can get away with in terms of eye candy and different filters and things like that, and what kind of sacrifices you might have to make if you're going to try to play this game with a 970 at 4K. This is actually running at 4K right now. I'm getting about, there's an FPS counter on the top left corner of the screen. It's really tiny. It's the Steam overlay one, and if you can see it, I might try to enlarge it in post-production if I can. But I'm getting about anywhere from the low 60s to the mid 70s. It's a little lower than average right now, I'd say, because there's a lot of foliage, like I'm in the mountains, and grass is really taxing on your hardware in this game. Performance really takes a hit when you're running through a lot of greenery, but so bear that in mind. But basically, I want to start off also by saying that since this is a GTX 970 that we're working with, we only do have 3.5 gigs of GDDR5 memory, not the advertised 4. And there's that whole debacle that I'm not going to get into right now. I'm just strictly talking about the specs as they stand. So we need to be mindful when tuning the settings in this game to not exceed that 3.5 gig limit. I'm going to go into the settings here, and under graphics, you'll find the majority of your settings. And you'll see right here I'm running at 4K. I've got VSync turned off. And I've got pretty much everything on minimum settings. This is like the lowest of the lows right here. Actually, I take that back. We can actually crank these up all the way because they have no effect on performance whatsoever. But as far as all these other settings here, and you know, how much of a difference do they really make? Well, I was kind of exploring, experimenting with trial and error today, and I kind of drew some conclusions that I wanted to share with you guys. The first thing I want to show you guys, it's easier to just show you than it is to explain it, but I'm going to drive through the mountains here, and visually the game still looks great, even with everything turned down. I mean, everything's super sharp, and it still looks way better than the original on PS4 or Xbox One. But you might notice, especially when I'm running past the trees, if you look at the trees that are in the distance, and as I approach them, and the hillside as well, the shadows kind of just pop up out of nowhere when I get close enough to them, which can be kind of distracting. And that's the shadow draw distance, basically, or the distance at which the game engine begins to render shadows. And right now I have that, like I said, everything's turned way down. And like, you know, the lower quality textures I can deal with, and even the shadows that are like the shadow of my car, even though it's not like super sharp, it's a little blurry, I can deal with that because it's consistent and it's not constantly changing in front of me, so I don't really notice it. It kind of just blends into the rest of the environment. But as far as like the shadows on the trees and all the other objects as I'm approaching them, that's what really throws me off and pulls me out of the game personally. So what I want to do is address that problem by going into my settings, and this is just speaking of personal preference. I mean, you guys can emulate this if you want on your own systems, but if you don't like it, obviously you don't have to. This is just kind of me sharing my thoughts and my experience on this game. So what I did is I actually went to shadow quality. You'll notice that if you go to advanced graphics, that the extended shadows distance option is completely grayed out. That's because you can only access that setting if you have your shadow quality turned to very high. So I'm going to turn to very high, and then you'll notice that I can now adjust the extended shadows distance setting. So I'm going to crank that up all the way, as well as distance scaling, extended distance scaling. I'm going to crank that up as well. Now it's saying it's going to increase our video RAM usage, so I'm going to be mindful. I have GPU-Z opened up on another window, so I have to keep a lookout on that window to make sure that we're not maxing out our video RAM, because then we're going to start getting artifacts and it's going to be bad. So I'm also going to go to graphics here and just turn up the regular distance scaling. And I don't know if you noticed, but when I was driving through those mountains, there would be some bushes that wouldn't appear until I was like 30 feet away, or even some road signs that wouldn't appear until I got really close to them. And that's what really brings me out of the game. It's not so much the lower quality textures of the environment as a whole, it's when things are appearing out of nowhere magically in front of me that really kills the vibe, or kills the realism of the game. So now you'll notice, as I'm driving through here, frame rates have taken a bit of a hit. We're at 50, low 50s now. So that's to be expected. But then you'll notice, I can't really drive right now. Yeah, frame rate's pretty choppy right now, but then you'll also notice that when I pass through the trees, the game engine's actually rendering the shadows a lot further out. The draw distance for both the shadows and the objects themselves are a lot further out, so they're being rendered a lot earlier, and I'm not noticing them appear magically right in front of me as soon as, you know, when I get 10 feet away from them. And this really helps bring me back into the game, where I can kind of just focus on what's ahead of me, and because, you know, our eyes are very focused on movement. We can catch the smallest thing moving, like the smallest gnat or fly in the distance moving, because our eyes are naturally really good at picking up motion. So when those shadows and those objects are appearing out of nowhere, fairly close to me, it's distracting. So, and also speaking of which, we are just under our 3.5 gig memory limit. We're at we just hit 3.5. Actually, we passed it. We're at 3,504 megabytes. So we're actually 4 megabytes over what we should be, over our threshold here. But hopefully we won't see any artifacting. So far, everything looks pretty crystal clear on my end. Honestly, I think 44, the mid 40 frames per second range is too low for most of us. In fact, it's too low for me, and I wouldn't consider it enjoyable gameplay. It's playable, but it's not enjoyable for me. I want some buttery smooth, at least, you know, in the mid 60s average, before I can be like, all right, I'm completely immersed now. So what I'm gonna do is jump back into the settings here, into graphics. We're gonna try to find a way to up our frame rate again. So in the advanced settings, I'm gonna reduce this just a little bit. MSAA, if you're rocking this at 4K on a single card, even if it's a 980, probably turn it off. I mean, it does help a lot. It really smooths out the edges on pretty much everything just at X2, but there's an even bigger impact on performance there. I mean, I was seeing at least 15 to 20 frames being dropped, going from off to 2x, which is just too much. It's too big of a sacrifice for me. Fxaa is, you know, obviously not as taxing on the GPU, but it doesn't look quite as nice as MSAA either. Instead of sampling the instances of a jagged line or an edge, it kind of just blurs it. It kind of creates the illusion that it's smooth, but it kind of gives this blurred effect, and I don't really like the way it looks personally. These three, I found no difference in performance, so I kind of just left it to preference. If you like lots of people, go ahead and crank it up all the way. It doesn't really matter. As far as texture quality, it doesn't affect frame rates as much as it does video RAM, and since we're limited on that at this point, I'm definitely keeping that to normal. Shader quality, I mean, kind of the inverse of texture. Didn't affect my video RAM as much, but affected my frame rates by like 4 to 6 frames per second, so keeping that on normal as well. But back to the issue at hand. I went on a huge tangent there. I kind of just rambling here. We're just hanging out. It's casual. There's no script here. You can go off the handle. It's cool. I need to find a way to raise the frame rates back up. Alright guys, I just stumbled upon a discovery just now that I wasn't expecting, obviously. I went into the settings, and I had a hunch that the soft shadow setting was doing something finicky, because it was working. I was getting much higher frame rates earlier than what you just saw when I had the soft shadows changed to soft. And then I was doing some research online. A lot of people were saying, oh, switch to, you know, the manufacturer of your graphics card, which I also said earlier. And I switched it back to soft, just like that. And my frame rates instantly went back up to the mid 70s, or the low 70s, I guess, which is still, I don't know, like 10 frames per second better or more than what I was just getting. You can see I'm at like 7980 right now. So apparently that is a huge consideration for hardware impact, performance impact, and the shadows don't really look that much different to me, honestly. I am going to do more research on that, but I'm really glad that I stumbled across that, because now we're getting beautiful, like in the mid to low 70s range, you know, and now instead of dipping into the 50s and even the 40s, which was virtually unplayable for me anyway, now we're dipping into the 60s instead, and that's much more tolerable. And now this is great. This looks fantastic. I'm gaming at 4K, bitches. I mean, obviously it's hard for you to tell exactly the quality that I'm seeing right now, because, you know, obviously I'm rendering this video out at 1080 and uploading it to YouTube, and there's compression and all that sort of thing, but it looks really, really good to me. And I think the trade-off here is worth it, in my opinion. I think that getting those extra pixels really make the game look a lot sharper, and despite the filters, the various filters that you have to turn down to normal, the game still looks better than it does at Quad HD with a lot of those filters turned up. But this also leads to questions about the GTX 970 in general. Is it still a good card because it's only 3.5 gigs? Well, I think it's still a good card if 3.5 gigs of video RAM suits your playstyle. For example, if you wanted to play this game at 4K and you still wanted some of that extra additional eye candy, you know, like MSAA and whatnot, then I don't know. I don't know if I would recommend the 970 to someone who's looking for that kind of gaming experience. However, if you're like me and you're satisfied with the way this looks, or you just, you know, you're like me and you game at something lower than 4K regularly, like I game at Quad HD, I'm at 2560 by 1440 95% of the time, and so, you know, obviously at that I have a lot more leeway and I can crank up the settings a bit more and the game looks fantastic. But yeah, if you're a power user, especially if you're using like texture packs or you're doing a lot of mods, like you're playing Skyrim, things like that, you're gonna want that extra 500 gigs. That extra 500 gigs goes a long way. Like I said, I'm at 3.6 gigs of video RAM usage right now, and knock on wood that I'm not getting any kind of artifacts for tapping into that slower bank of memory that's aboard my GTX 970. But it's just you know, that it is what it is, and you have to make the call for yourself based on your specific needs as a user. So do you think it's worth having that higher resolution, having those extra pixels, and turning down a lot of those filters? I don't know. What's the trade-off? You know, and how do the scales weigh in your guys' opinion? I'm really curious to know. But this has been a cool video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Kyle with Awesome Sauce Network. Feel free to like the video if you enjoyed it, for all of its weirdness and randomness. And thank you guys for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you guys in the next one.